Howdy there, Isaac here. It's been a while, hasn't it? I have a few huge announcements for the end of this video, so please stay tuned at the end. Aside from that, let's have a quick recap. Stain officially joined the League of Villains in the last part, escaping with both Tokoyami and Bakugo still captured. Overhaul and Shigaraki came to an agreement much earlier than in canon, and we saw an evil Tokoyami at the very end. Very quick recap, but I want to get to the story already, so without further ado, What If Stain Joined the League, Part 3 starts now. In the last couple of months, things have been rather depressing at UA. The hero course had suffered from the loss of Tokoyami and Bakugo, especially Class 1A. People like Aizawa and All Might had been called into question as both heroes and teachers, respectively. It was a miracle that none of the students had been pulled out of the course, though many parents were highly considering it. This put a great strain on the biannual provisional license exams. The teachers of UA would come together to decide on whether their students should be allowed to take the exams, or if they should simply be taught in classrooms for the rest of the semester while things cooled down. The room would be split, with Snipe, Cementos, Present Mike, and Ectoplasm voting to skip the exams, and Aizawa, All Might, Midnight, and Vlad wishing to have their students take the test. Nezu listened to the arguments from both sides, with their main points being the safety of students, their progression, and the public's perception of the whole thing overall. Being the principal, the talented ferret was the real tiebreaker here. His decision would decide the fate of the school and their students. After much deliberation, Nezu would stand and voice his decision. While he recognized the concerns of the public, their students came first and foremost. That included their progression. He recognized the need for great heroes, but also recognized the world was quickly becoming more dangerous, and they needed to make sure their students could defend themselves and others, if need be. Nezu's statement was a bit controversial, with Snipe and Ectoplasm stating they were just students and shouldn't have to fight. The room would erupt back into argument, with Nezu sighing. Eventually, the teachers would quiet back down, and the decision would be finalized. The students were to take their provisional license exams. Now, I think initially Deku and company would be depressed and unmotivated due to the fact that their, friends were still missing. Yet, this would eventually become their motivation. Whether it be Deku, Uraraka, or some other student, they'd come to the realization that if they became professional heroes, they'd be able to help save their friends themselves. This, coupled with Deku being far more analytical and putting more emphasis on teamwork, would pave their way to victory. While most of the other schools ended up attacking UA, their assaults were nowhere near as brutal due to everyone kind of feeling bad for them. Not to mention, UA's reputation was quickly getting dragged through the mud, and a couple of the other schools ended up thinking Shiketsu High was a stronger school. That said, the exam was still difficult, especially for Todoroki, who'd still get egged on by that tornado guy. But with the recent events, Todoroki would be far more pissed about his recent failures, promising he'd focus on rescuing these civilians first and foremost. Todoroki could deal with this beef later. Right now, he needed to turn this killer whale into sushi. Honestly, I could see several other heroic moments playing out and much more character development, but it's nothing the anime didn't show itself. Yes, things play out differently in this What If, but much of the shine the students got in the anime comes through here, just in different ways. Every student in UA would get their license, and that one meatball guy would also get his license, despite him seeming a little villainous. Now, the Shie Hassaikai arc would go exactly the same. Actually, not really. See, due to recent events and UA coming under fire and heroes in general being questioned more, UA students under Year 3 would be barred from participating in joining heroes out in the field. Unfortunately, and fortunately kind of, for all involved, Deku, Ochako, Kirishima, and Tsu would all be held back. However, while the students studied, the League would send their members to be interviewed by Overhaul. Twice, Toga, and Muscular would pass, with Overhaul taking a particular interest in the meathead, due to him being much like Rappa, thus easy to manipulate. Mustard would just barely pass. Overhaul and his goons getting quite annoyed with the immature brat. Luckily for him, he wasn't quite disposable yet, though Overhaul would make sure Mustard would be one of the first villains to fight any heroes who came nearby. Sometime later, Eri would attempt her escape, though, unlike last time, she'd end up running into Toga and the other League members. Eri bumped into the high schooler, with Toga first being annoyed at the intrusion, only to notice it was a little girl, one that was trembling with fear. Toga would, almost instinctively, wrap her arms around the girl, knowing exactly how it felt to be on the run for your life. Twice would frantically ask what was wrong while simultaneously telling the girl to cheer up. Muscular simply crossed his arms and watched on, while Mustard just felt uncomfortable and awkwardly shifted to the side. Overhaul walked out of the shadows, a man profusely apologizing next to him before seeing Eri and almost melting into a puddle as he sighed with relief.
There you are, Eri. Come back here and return to your room. At once.
The tone in Overhaul's voice wasn't entirely evil, but it made Toga uncomfortable, it taking every ounce of her self-restraint for her to not pull a knife out and start swinging.
Hey, what's going on here? She seems really scared,
Twice yelled. Meanwhile, Eri looked back and locked eyes with Overhaul. The man tugged at his gloves, the girl's grip tightening around Toga, the chill of bloodlust filling the air. Muscular smirked a bit while Mustard felt a chill run down his spine, Toga and Twice instinctively moving to grab their weapons.
I won't ask again. Come over here, or do you want to curse these people too? And you four.
Overhaul's gaze turned to the League members.
Don't put our deal in jeopardy. I've only paid off your debts so far. Shigaraki still has no actual funds yet.
That was it. Toga grabbed her knife and began to pull it out, before Eri quickly let go and ran back to Overhaul, the man looking at the girl with what could only be described as disgust.
Good. I'm glad you know your place, Eri. But just in case...
Overhaul, in a show of malice and power, put his bare hand on Eri's face, the girl getting a partial scream out before disappearing, only to reform seconds later, now unconscious. Everyone froze in place, with anger rising up in Toga and Twice, unlike any they felt in a long time. Muscular felt a slight hint of pity for the girl, while Mustard took his mask off to dry heave. At that moment, everyone there realized just how horrible this man really was.
Next time, give her back to me when I ask. I'd hate for all of you to go into a coma.
Overhaul handed the unconscious girl to her caretaker, before walking away without another word. Toga was absolutely enraged. She wanted to unsheath her knife and slice open Overhaul's throat, though it'd be a death sentence for the group. Instead, she came up with a plan to help out the League while also getting rid of this Overhaul guy. First, she needed to get out of this place. The rest would be easy. She tried to remember everything that she knew about the Shie Hassaikai, as she looked at the allies around her. She looked from Twice to Mustard to Muscular. Muscular. Muscle. That's it! She walked over to Muscular, grabbing his hand and leading him down the hallway, telling him she had someone she wanted him to fight. This got the meathead to comply, though he'd say he didn't want to fight Overhaul, at least not without watching him fight first. The two would eventually make their way to where Hijeki and Rappa were situated, the two arguing about their strategy to fight off heroes if such a time comes. Toga interrupts by asking Rappa if he liked fighting. Rappa would answer honestly, with Muscular quickly jumping in and starting to talk about his own fighting career. The two quickly began getting psyched up, much to Hijeki's dismay. Before the shield villain could protest, the two meatheads charged at each other. Muscular's muscle fibers tearing like crazy, while Rappa warmed up his arms. Unfortunately for them, a barrier would be erected between their fists, effectively stopping the fight before it even began.
Come on. What if Master Overhaul needed us and you two got injured due to this needless fighting? I cannot endorse such reckless actions. I will not. Ah!
The villain would fall over, his shield dropping down as he hit the floor. Toga, who was standing over the man, would shrug and simply state she knocked him out, telling the two meatheads to have fun. Seconds later, Rappa would be tearing Muscular apart, though this didn't last very long, as the blonde began growing muscle faster than Rappa could punch it away. It took Muscular under 2 minutes to completely beat Rappa down, being one of the very few men to do so in a fair fight. Muscular stood tall over his opponent, beaten and bloody sure, but victorious. Before going for the kill, Toga would bring him back to his senses, telling the blonde they couldn't kill any Yakuza, plus if Muscular let him live, then they'd get to fight the villain again. With Muscular stopped, Toga would gleefully collect some blood from Rappa, getting enough to fill 2 whole vials. Despite Rappa not being cute, Toga was happy she could use her quirk for something so important. With this, she'd be able to leave and contact Shigaraki. Well, that, and she had someone else she needed to speak to. The next few days would go by much like in the anime, with Overhaul learning of the authorities' movements and acting accordingly. He was suspicious of the League members as well, but didn't have much time to worry about them. The Birdman would prepare his 8 precepts and the League members for battle, strategically placing them around his base so he could escape. Toga and Twice would be paired towards the middle of the base, like usual, with Mustard being placed on the surface team with Rick. His name is now Rick, everybody. Which was mostly out of spite. As for Muscular, well, after Overhaul heard about his fight with Rappa, the Yakuza knew this guy would be a powerful pawn. Besides, if the heroes did get to him, Muscular would provide a much-needed distraction, though Overhaul doubted that would happen. The raid starts much like it did in the anime, and goes pretty much the same up until Twice and Toga start mocking Mimic. See, Mimic would feel fine showing himself to the pair since they didn't have any long-range attacks. That was until Mustard revealed himself. 2 shots would be fired, hitting Mimic in both his arms, a third one hitting his stomach, causing the villain to fall near the League members.
What are you doing here? You're supposed to be captured on the surface.
Heh, something I picked up from Stain and Toga. The ability to disappear when there's a panic, Mustard said, before pointing his gun right at Mimic's head. With Mimic finished off, Twice would make a clone of Muscular, using him to break through the walls Mimic had put up. Meanwhile, Night Eye, Aizawa, and a couple other heroes that were pretty much fodder would make their way through the walls as well, using Night Eye's hyper-density seals to do so. Once the League and heroes reached the room Overhaul was fighting in, they'd both go slack-jawed. They saw Mirio and Muscular fighting together? Well, sort of. Mirio was taking on Overhaul, while Muscular was busy beating Chronostasis, Shin, and Deidaro into the ground. Both the heroes and villains would act accordingly, which turned the battlefield into a chaotic mess. Hyperdensity seals and bullets went flying everywhere. The fodder heroes would mostly be taken out. Mustard would be knocked out by a density seal and subsequent hit by Eraserhead. Muscular would also be taken down a peg or two with several hyperdensity seals, the effects of Dataro's quirk making it harder for him to dodge. Toga had managed to dodge the hyperdensity seals meant for her, scanning the room and quickly running over to where Eri was. She would pick the girl up and run behind the heavily injured Muscular, while Mirio began a combo that would soon knock out Chisaki while his quirk was still erased by Eraserhead. Aizawa would turn his attention to Twice, while Nai took on Muscular. Sir Nai, using a mixture of his quirk and precise attacks, would be able to take down the Brute, while Eraserhead would, after several tries, be able to apprehend Twice. Toga held Eri tightly, hoping backup would soon come. She looked around for any source of help, but it was all over. Mustard was down. Muscular and Twice couldn't help either. Even Chisaki was now knocked out. Nai and Eraserhead stopped their assault, seeing that Toga had Eri and a knife. But Mirio soon joined the fray, thinking he could use his quirk to safely rescue Eri, just like he did with the Overhaul. The hero hopeful rushed in, phasing his leg through Eri just to kick Toga in the face. Toga would be kicked away, slamming into a nearby wall, though she still held onto Eri tightly. She couldn't be sure, but the moment she hit that wall, it felt like a huge explosion shook the hideout. Though, that could just be her concussion. But then the explosions kept happening, causing even the heroes to pause, looking back towards their entrance to the room. Suddenly, the ceiling caved in, with Shigaraki, Kurogiri, Stain, and Compress falling through. Shigaraki would reach out to touch Mirio, the hero hopeful just barely able to phase through it and retreat. Unfortunately, Shigaraki wasn't in the mood to let the heroes live and would rush down Mirio, while Stain drew his sword and immediately engaged Nai. Compress went to capture Eraserhead, though the hero erased his quirk just in time, retreating, but letting go Twice in the process. War broke out between the two groups, with Muscular and Twice rejoining the fight as well, the former regaining some vigor once his quirk reactivated. Shigaraki, while he was fast in his own right, would be a horrible matchup against Mirio, his only saving grace being that Kurogiri teleported most of Lemillion's hits away. With the numbers disadvantage and the fact they were fatigued, the heroes would soon fall. Stain, with his insane speed and tactics, would eventually cut Nai and paralyze him, with Eraserhead getting knocked out against Twice and Muscular. Toga watched on, her head still a bit foggy from the concussion. She noticed the rumbling had gotten louder. It wasn't above or even in front of her, but it was coming from within the hideout itself. Toga looked over to see a terrifying sight. It was a large, demonic monster raging within the hallway that the heroes had come from. It was, despite its outbursts, getting closer and closer to where she was. So, Shigaraki did let him loose. The Yakuza really were screwed then. Toga smiled, laying her head back against the wall as Mirio slowly got surrounded by villains. "Compress! That's our cue to leave. Call the surface team!" Shigaraki yelled, noticing the monster that soon joined them within the room. Compress did so, dodging a few swipes from the monster in the process. Soon Dabi, Magni, Moonfish, and Spinner joined the fray as well, while Stain, Twice, and Muscular held off Mirio. Aizawa, who had been uppercutted and slammed into a wall, slowly began to recover. He looked around, seeing the room filled with villains, one of which was a dark, raging beast. Before anything, Aizawa erased Stain's quirk, which allowed Nai to get up. Aizawa then went to erase the dark monster's quirk, only to see Dabi launch a large blue flame at the creature, causing it to shrink a bit. A few seconds later, Aizawa's eyes would widen with dread as he saw Tokoyami appear from within the darkness. The high schooler had dark circles under bloodshot eyes, with several burn marks surrounding his arms and torso, some of which looked old. Shigaraki, I captured all the villains I could. I did exactly as you asked. Aizawa watched as his former student bowed before the leader of the League of Villains, fear clearly in his eyes. Just what the hell was going on? No! A scream rang out, causing Aizawa to look over towards the fight, seeing yet another horror. In front of Mirio, Night-Eye stood, two swords sticking through his chest and torso, held by none other than Stain and Spinner. Mirio grimaced. It was the first time Aizawa ever saw him do so, and began to rage himself. He quickly punched Stain and Spinner away from his master, catching and setting him down before engaging Muscular. Aizawa watched on as Kurogiri opened a large portal and stepped through it before his quirk could be erased. Shigaraki then ordered the rest of the villains to retreat, having twice summoned several clones to distract Mirio. Slowly, one by one, the villains disappeared, the last thing Mirio and Aizawa saw being the smiling face of Shigaraki. And like that, the League of Villains had won. Once the League was gone, and the clones had been dealt with, Mirio would pick up Night-Eye and rush towards the surface. Aizawa was left to think over what exactly had happened, the whole world spinning around him. He walked up towards the surface, discovering the damage the Dark Shadow had done in the process. There was nothing but a stain of blood where Rocklock had been left, so either Mirio picked him up, or he was gone. Fat Gum would be found within a room that hadn't been there before. He was injured but seemed alright, so Aizawa moved on. Further on ahead, Sun Eater would be found, knocked out from either his fight with the villains or with Dark Shadow. Aizawa didn't know which. One major thing Eraser had noticed was that all the Yakuza, at least the 8 precepts, were missing. On the surface, things weren't doing well either. Ryukyu, the dragon hero, had been badly burned, presumably from Dabi, while her student hadn't fared much better, having been stabbed by one of Moonfish's attacks, though her injuries weren't nearly as egregious as Night-Eye's. They had stopped Overhaul, but this was no victory for the heroes, especially after what happened to Nejide. Unfortunately, this wasn't the worst of the bad news. In the scramble to save Night-Eye, and with Aizawa being mentally destroyed, they'd forgotten to properly secure Overhaul. 20 to 30 minutes later, it would be revealed that Overhaul had escaped, with no traces of where to. Aizawa could hear the cracking of glass, of Hero Society, all around him. Roughly a day would pass. Night-Eye would pass on, the media would destroy the heroes, calling them incompetent in all sorts of names, especially calling into question why the #1 hero, Endeavor, wasn't on the scene. And Shigaraki watched every single second of this, reveling in this victory he perfectly planned out. Well, mostly. He had hoped the heroes would capture Overhaul, and he regretted not finishing off the Yakuza then and there, but that Mirio guy was just too strong in the moment. Hopefully these new recruits would prove to strengthen the league. Well, that and this Dr. Garaki guy. Shigaraki had so much on his plate, but he needed to take things one step at a time, starting with recruiting the Yakuza Tokoyami captured. Last night he had uncompressed them, and tied them up, sending Mustard and Moonfish to guard them. The Yakuza vehemently refused Shigaraki's invitation last night, except for Rappa, who immediately joined due to Muscular being on the team. But maybe today the rest of them would crack. Tomura grabbed Kurogiri and Stain before meeting with the remaining precepts. Upon entering the room, Toya spoke out. "You come to give another speech? We get it, you'll kill us, but we accept it, so just do it already." Though Toya was willing to die, a couple of the other Yakuza weren't as committed, and Shigaraki knew it. "Let's do it, Shigaraki. We don't need criminals like this," Stain said, grabbing the hilt of his sword. "No. You'll join us whether you want to or not. You'll help me and my family build a world of our dreams. A world of your own dreams, filled with your own purpose. Kurogiri, untie them." The mist monster would go to question Shigaraki, though the villain had none of it, ordering Kurogiri to untie them once more. He did so, untying each and every one of the Yakuza, much to his and Stain's dismay. Toya, once his comrades were free, immediately stood up, using his quirk to steal the revolver Mustard had brandished and bragged about while he was guarding them. He pulled the hammer back and aimed it right at Shigaraki, then pulled the trigger. For a second, all anyone heard was the shot that had rung out. The leader of the League of Villains stood, blood pouring out of his shoulder, right below his subclavian artery. Suddenly, a torrent of teeth rushed forward at Toya, with Moonfish screaming for flesh, a barrier popping up and just barely stopping said teeth, cracking a bit at the force. Stain unsheathed his sword, and Mustard pulled out the 9, while Yu and Hikiji readied themselves for combat. But Shigaraki simply yelled at everyone to stand down, before walking towards Toya. The air turned cold, and the look Shigaraki had made even Stain take notice of his aura. Tomura ordered Hikiji to take down the barrier, which the Yakuza did, with Toya frozen in place, the revolver falling to the floor. I was supposed to kill you." "You should have." Shigaraki then began, with only one arm, beating Toya down. In front of all the other Yakuza, Shigaraki threw their comrade onto the ground and began hitting, kicking, and stomping on Toya. It was complete brutality, a decimation of the precept, but it sent a message. Any defiance would fail and be met with force. Afterwards, Shigaraki would have Kurogiri pick up Toya and take him to the infirmary, while ordering Mustard and Moonfish to show the remaining Yakuza around their hideout. While walking towards the infirmary himself, Stain would catch up with Shigaraki. Tomura had shown something earlier, the aura of a ruler. One that, while nowhere near close, wasn't all that dissimilar to All for One's. That genuinely worried the hero killer. "What was that earlier, Shigaraki? Why force them to join and not just kill them?" "You know why. After seeing that, they no longer are forced. They want to serve me. Just like Tokoyami." "Are we really going to reforge this society into one where we could all have our dreams come true?" Stain asked, the air growing stale around them. "I want everyone to achieve their dreams. I don't care how it's reforged. I just want to tear down this hero society. And I'll do whatever it takes to do that." The air grew cold, though was still as stagnant as ever. Shigaraki looked back at his comrade, only then noticing that he had grabbed his katana. "You didn't kill me back in Camino because you wanted to see me blossom. Are you beginning to regret that decision?" Stain drew his sword, putting it right up to Shigaraki's neck. "I want to protect everyone here. Those Yakuza are a threat, and so are you. You're leading us down a dangerous road, and in the end, we'll all just be disposable pawns to you." Shigaraki grabbed Stain's sword, instantly turning it to dust. "How dare you? I trust my comrades and wish to protect them as well. Your paranoia is the only threat here. Tomura looked Stain in the eyes, letting off the same aura he had with the Yakuza. Stain responded in kind, letting off his own murderous aura, stepping up to the challenge. Before the two could make contact, though, Kurogiri teleported their respective attacks away, while stepping in between them. Just what is going on here? Why are you two trying to kill each other? Kurogiri asked, though he was only looking at Shigaraki. It's nothing, they both said, relaxing. Both would turn around and go their separate ways. Neither of them liked this, but they knew one thing. There could be only one. Guys, that's where I'm going to leave the what if off for right now. But stay tuned for this huge announcement I have. I've decided to join the Game Theory fundraiser for St. Jude. If you haven't seen their video, basically for the entire month of October, people can raise money and end up sending it to St. Jude via a website that tracks how much you've made. I'm not sure if any other anime YouTubers will do this, but I hope so. I know I'm a small YouTuber and hardly have any reach here, but that's why I need all of you guys. The anime community is huge and full of powerful, generous people. I mean, for Kami's sake, we have Goku as a mascot. The strongest, kindest selfish guy ever. I've made a Patreon that should be going live as this video does. All the money made from it will go to St. Jude, and if anyone stays on board for November, it'll go to the Game Theory livestream on November 30th. Please guys, I'm counting on you to lend me some of your energy so we can not only show the power of the anime community, but hopefully so we can have some massive breakthroughs against cancer. Thank you for listening if you got this far. Have a good day or night, wherever you are. Bye bye.